Hello, I'm David Breeden. I'm the senior minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, a historically humanist congregation, and this is Coffee and Wisdom. For the past 3 weeks now, this is the third week, we've been talking about social justice in mostly Protestant denominations since just after the American Civil War, looking at how denominations adapted to social changes in the U.S. In something called the social gospel, and how that became social activism in the early to mid 20th century, and then tracing what happened after the civil rights movement, which for most people, most historians, I think, is considered really the high watermark of Protestant Christianity and how in the interaction with the larger social issues. And where are we going now? That's the real question. So that's what I want to think about today, is where we're going now. A great book on the subject is The Leaderless Revolution, How Ordinary People Will Take Power and Change Politics in the 21st Century by Carney Ross. He was a British diplomat. He got fed up with the bureaucracy of how governments work in the larger world. He was in Africa. And he said, this is just not the way to do it anymore. We have other ways to govern and to make decisions. Interesting book. Ella Baker, remember, I quoted her last week when I began to talk about how actually the narrative of the civil rights movement is not as simple as we often like it to be. Ella Baker long ago said, "My theory is strong people don't need strong leaders." John Lewis, a strong leader, was part of Ella Baker's movement. And the idea that people can really do it themselves. But of course, the technology wasn't there, only the idea was there. And nowadays, we do have what's known as leaderless resistance because of the advances in technology. A recent New York Times headline said, "Today's activism, spontaneous, leaderless, but not without aim. Welcome to 21st century activism, where social media is the strongest organizer. At the core is an egalitarian spirit, a belief that everyone's voice matters." So that is where we are today, not yesterday. Now, an interesting development in kind of this way of thinking is Barbara Johns. You may have heard that the state of Virginia recently removed Robert E. Lee as one of their representatives in Washington, D.C. You see this nice empty spot here where Lee used to stand, and a statue of Barbara Johns will be brought in from the state of Virginia instead to decorate the Capitol Rotunda. Who was Barbara Johns? Well, interesting. She was in high school in the 1950s and led in the state of Virginia a walkout because of segregation. And that case went into the Brown versus Board of Education decision that finally desegregated American schools. So Barbara Johns, a civil rights era person who really hasn't made gotten huge press over the years, is known within the state of Virginia, but she's going to replace Robert E. Lee. So a couple of different ideas and movements going on there and culminating, coming together. But this is kind of our realization nowadays that you don't have to be these great men, as they used to be called, to be the people who make a real difference in our social lives and in our history. So leaderless revolutions. Arab Spring really started the whole thing. Didn't work out in every country, but that it's going to go down in history as one of those moments when leaderless revolutions really began. Occupy Wall Street here in the U.S. A very interesting one is Paulo Alegra from Brazil, an experiment in participatory budgeting. You can look up participatory budgeting online and see how that works. But what happened is, in this city, the government began to share money, tax money, with people who would meet in small groups around the city and talk about what the needs were in their particular neighborhoods. It was highly successful. The money and the opportunities for education quadrupled after this particular participatory budgeting. So again, going to the grassroots, actually asking people what they need and what they can do, sharing that up the chain through our technology. So very interesting experiment. Of course, there are several right-leaning groups here in the U.S. that are also leaderless in that way. One of the things about leaderless groups is that you can't prosecute the leader. And so forming cells rather than having a top-down structure is one way to avoid prosecution. So there you have it. Probably the best example of this is in Hong Kong before COVID. But in Hong Kong, again, protesting for democracy, greater rights, civil rights groups organized peaceful protests, mostly parades. These were middle class, middle-aged people, baby buggies, and that kind of thing, balloons, and you probably saw some of this covered in media. So civil rights groups organize peaceful protests. That's one way to go about doing this. Student groups, college student groups, sponsored civil disobedience. Those are the ones who would block the highways, block the malls, etc. Kids who were younger people who were out there and willing to be arrested for their beliefs. Two very different groups. And then the digital savvy live streamed those events. They recorded police brutality, something that has begun here in the U.S. as well. They also coordinated water and food supplies to these protesters as they went, and they got the word out on the social media platforms. Go to this particular intersection, etc. The most popular in the Hong Kong protests was Facebook, followed by WhatsApp, then YouTube, Instagram, WeChat, and Twitter. So there you have it, a whole revolution that was sponsored by social media. And we're going to be seeing a lot more of that kind of thing as we go along. The most successful here in the U.S. is probably Black Lives Matter. You may not know the name of the founders of Black Lives Matter. It's Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi. These three women started the idea. It began, as some of you know, by a hashtag and has grown from there. Right up front on their manifesto, they're going to say, we are expansive. We are a collective of liberators who believe in an inclusive and spacious movement. Room for lots of people to come on in and join with us in this. Again, leaderless revolutions that are going on all over the world at this point. The question then is, where does leaderless activism leave congregations dedicated to social justice causes? Here we have a portrait of a great old 19th century Victorian parson patting the little kids on the head as he goes out to help the poor. This was the model for a very long time. And I would say that a lot of denominations and a lot of leaders still see themselves in this role as the august leader who's participating in the larger social structures where they live. But no, this is really a thing of the past, and things are changing very, very quickly. So that fellow and the patriarchal structure of how he operated, this is going away very quickly, and we are seeing a brand new day in terms of social activism in the world. So where does that leave congregations? And that's the last thing I'll talk about tomorrow morning, kind of what I'm seeing anyway. I do try to keep up. Excuse me. We've got some stuff coming up this week. On Thursday, December 24th at 5 p.m., Christmas Eve service at First Unitarian Society. Join in. We don't usually have Christmas Eve services, being a humanist congregation, but this year, due to COVID and a little challenges of travel and gathering and all of that, we decided to have a little something for people to gather. So that's 5 p.m. on Thursday, the Christmas Eve. next Sunday, I'll be talking about the silence of the ancestors. Our theme for this month has been stillness. That's pretty good for the holiday season, probably, as a theme. And I'll be thinking about how the past informs the present and how we hear those voices from the past coming along. Thanks a lot for listening, and you can help us out to keep the voice of humanism strong by going to firstunitarian.org/donate. And I'll be back for the last in our series on the social gospel tomorrow. Thank you.